The project is about the question of how to be the architect of your voice, meaning to make decisions about, is this personal space thing a little? To make decisions about how you're going to speak, listen, learn, read, be in the world based on the threshold questions of what do I want for myself and what do I expect from myself. So Amanda Werner, otherwise known sometimes as the Monopolyman, is a creative advocate. They have a JD from UCLA. They know how to do things like write 14,000 word briefs with footnotes in them and all that, but they also dress up and burn shit down, so that's good too. So Amanda has way cooler things to say than I. After, a lot of this is going to be interactive. It's nice because we've got a tight little group here. So after Amanda's done what Amanda's going to do, I also want to encourage you to stick around, and particularly we've got another actually UCLA person coming who'd love to do a focus group with some people around free speech when she gets here. So we'll talk a little bit more about that after this.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for coming out. Yeah, like Laura said, I think, I'm going to kind of go through a little bit of background about who I am. Hopefully, most of you guys are familiar with Monopolyman, but not everybody remembers a year ago because these years have been like decades. I'm going to go through a little bit of what my kind of philosophy is for these kind of actions and where I think creative activism can be especially effective in the Trump era. And then I'm going to kind of go through some case examples, and we're going to analyze, hopefully together, in kind of an interaction and dialogue about, what things work, what things didn't work, what the different elements at play are, how we can improve these kind of activism performances, and we'll just kind of go from there. So I hope it'll be an open discussion. Feel free if you want to move close to the front. But yeah, and then we'll have a nice Q&A at the end where you can ask me any weird questions you might have that are probably more interesting than stuff I prepared. So I wanted to first give just kind of an intro to who I am. I was a born troublemaker. This is my senior high school photo. And pretty much I've been raising hell since I was old enough to walk. I organized my first protest when I was 14 years old. I found out that Disney used sweatshops to create its clothes and things like that, and so I organized a protest at my local mall. Got kicked out in about 5 minutes, but it provided a good template for what I was going to do later on. Similarly, you can see here that I made a little statement in my high school photo, and fun story with this is that they actually spent $6,000 to reprint this section of the yearbook to edit it out. Even though you'll notice the statement that I chose to make was kind of the antithesis of an actual statement, trying to skirt that line. But yeah, so I ended up just signing everybody's yearbook with a Sharpie and writing it right back in. So this is kind of how I got here. Once I went to college, I did probably what a lot of folks in this room are doing. I studied a lot of political science and communications and all that stuff and tried to figure out what I wanted to do. And at the same time, I had a lot of part-time jobs where I was working, somewhere in the cause. I did door-to-door fundraising for homeless charities. I worked for a rape crisis center, did a lot of different things. And it just kind of became more apparent that, you can do a lot from the outside, but you need to also have the tools from the inside. And so that's why I kind of very reluctantly decided to go to law school. So I went to UCLA. My plan was to sue corporations. And then when I actually learned what it takes to sue anyone, I decided that life actually sounds terrible, and I went into policy campaigns. So for the last few years, I've been directing policy campaigns for nonprofits. Now I'm a strategy director at a progressive consulting firm. And really, in the last year or so, my career has taken a very different trajectory. Since Monopolyman happened, things have really taken off for me in a way that they hadn't before. And looking back on my career, what I've realized is that I spent a lot of time trying to kind of fit into the DC policy world and be a very serious lawyer and all those things. And if I try very hard, I can be a pretty decent lawyer, I can be a pretty decent policy advocate, but it wasn't until I leaned into what had made me, and sorry, I didn't mean to reference Sheryl Sandberg there, but it wasn't until I really started embracing what about me was strange and different that my career really took off. So I would just encourage everyone in this room, don't try to be mediocre at being someone else, but really like take what makes you, stand out and lean into that. So why creative activism? I've been thinking a lot about this in the Trump era. I think creative activism has always been very effective, but I think it's particularly effective in this cultural moment. And I think the reason for that is our effective campaigns have to reflect where we are in that moment. It's very precise. And right now, I think we'd all agree that we're in a very strange one, and we're really in an age of distraction. And so when you can't rely on the news cycle to be normal and use the same tools that people have been using for decades, you really have to make yourself impossible to ignore. And so that's how Monopolyman took off. I'll get into more of the details of what exactly happened there, but I think in general, my philosophy has been, you have to get in front of the cameras, you have to pull their attention away, and basically use the power of social media to force reporters to cover you. People in the press are being pulled in a lot of different directions these days all the time. They have a lot of pressure to get clicks and to get people interested. So how I've done it is really just start the conversation on social media and get them to come to you instead of kind of reaching out to them and doing the traditional appeals. So for instance, when I first did Monopolyman, I had a moment where I was standing in the hallway and I was in this whole ridiculous costume and I had all these reporters around me, but they were all doing their own thing. They were covering the actual hearing. And there was this woman who was on the phone with her boss, and I just heard her, and she was like, "Wait, you want me to interview them? What? Why?" And she kind of looks at me, and I'm just like, haha, you have to talk to me now because the internet is talking about me. And she had no idea, but ended up doing a full interview with me, and I think was very happy she covered it in the end. So then the question is, what do you do with that attention when you have it? And I've been doing a lot of thinking about this and thinking about it a lot in the case of Trump, because he has been consistently the most attention-grabbing politician we have had, certainly in my lifetime. But the thing that does distinguish him from other politicians, besides all of the terrible things that we all know, is that he doesn't really have any message at the end of the day. He has a lot of very confusing things going on. He's constantly doing something weird and just kind of galling. I think part of his appeal is just novelty. It's like watching a car crash. You don't actually want to watch it, you don't actually enjoy watching it, but you still can't look away. And so I think that has been depressingly effective in capturing attention, but I actually don't think it's been that effective in inspiring people to action. I think even his most diehard supporters at the end of the day, enjoy laughing at him, enjoy kind of this existential ennui that is, I think, killing many of us inside. But I don't actually think he's feeding their souls in that way that really inspiring action can. So I think the trick here is that, while Trump embodies the very worst of Hollywood and Washington, I think we can kind of combine politics and theatrics to inspire hope and drive action, to do the things he does but flip them on their head and actually use them for good. The fact is that people want new ideas. They want to be entertained. We are living in the age where everyone has a personal computer in their pocket at all times. It's kind of endless entertainment. So you do have to do things that are unique, that are innovative. It can't all be dry policy. You have to think, with new ideas. But entertainment and inspiration can work together. It's just hard to pull off. So, the last couple things I would say on that are just, a lot of our movements right now especially are focused on anger and sadness, which makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of terrifying, depressing things happening in the world, and we need to feel all of those feelings and make space for others to just kind of have that grief. But I do think we need to still have laughter and kindness and inspiration and kind of all the things that make us full human beings. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, what's going to get us through this really dark period in American history is our humanity. So this is what I'm hoping to kind of pull out with creative activism. I want to note, at the beginning that not all creativity looks alike. I mean, these two photos are me in silly costumes. I don't think that that is something we should be doing for every cause, particularly, the depressing and angering ones that we see on a regular basis. I think humor does work really well with this administration in particular because it helps expose their farce. I mean, aside from all of the evil of Trump and all of the, silly things that happen, at the end of the day, he's just ridiculous. I mean, I feel like we all can tell that in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, if we continue to exist as a democracy, we'll see. I think people are going to look back at this period and it's going to just be over the top ridiculous. Other dictators don't have this kind of weird slapstick, I don't know. I think that's important. So I think we can use humor to call that out and to, expose him. Basically, the emperor has no clothes, right? Like this whole concept of we're taking him seriously, but he's not a serious man, and I think it helps us to continue to do that. Because our leaders at the end of the day only command the authority that we grant to them. And so if we can undermine that authority by doing silly antics, I think that actually is very effective. But sometimes we do need to expose the inhumanity and let our anger rise to the level of the offense. And in this administration, there is a lot to be very angry about. I found particularly that, honestly, disgust can be a really compelling emotion. I don't think we use it enough. A lot of the things this administration does is disgusting. And so, for instance, I also participated in the protest against Kirstjen Nielsen, Trump's Department of Homeland Security secretary at the Mexican restaurant. This was like a couple weeks after the child separation policy came out. In that case, humor was not the right thing to do, right? We have children in cages. We should not be making any jokes about that. But in that case, I think disgust worked really well because people were feeling just completely sick about this. And so taking that disgust and that anger and expressing it to their face, I think worked really, really well. This other slide here was not something I did, but folks that I've worked with before. This group, Dignity and Power Now, out in LA, they worked to reform the LA County Sheriff's Department, and they did a jailhouse bed drop. Basically, the LA County is looking to build a new multi-million-dollar jail while folks are still being over-policed. And so what they did is they took hundreds and hundreds of jail beds and put them right outside the county supervisor's offices. So it's another example where humor doesn't work, but it is still striking, and it brings that emotion straight away. So with that said, let's look into some specific acts and kind of talk about it together, what worked, what didn't, what factors were at play. So the first one, of course, is Monopolyman. This is my claim to fame, and to give a little background for the folks that aren't familiar, this was actually a week where the Senate was holding hearings on Wells Fargo, as well as Equifax, which had just done its data breach that affected 2/3 of the adult population in the U.S. And both of these companies had used the practice of forced arbitration, which is basically a fine print clause deep in their contracts that forces you to give away your day in court. So if they do something wrong, like create a fake account or expose all your personal data, you can't sue them and you can't join together with other consumers to get your money back. Instead, you have to go to this private system that's completely slated in their favor. So that was the issue I was working on. And how this basically came together is that week we were doing a hill drop. We were printing some materials, some get out of jail free cards, dropping them off at Senate offices, telling them to oppose this legislation that was going to allow Wells Fargo and Equifax to keep using this practice of forced arbitration. And I was talking to folks at my work, and we decided that it would be a really fun hill drop if we had also dressed up as Monopolyman and kind of went door to door and did that. And it just so happened that these hearings were scheduled that same week. So I just decided, I've been in hearings before. I've been kind of the awkward person in the background who realizes they're on camera and it's kind of, trying to get out of the way. And I just thought to myself, if I could get on camera as Monopolyman, that could be really fun. So that's pretty much how this happened. And I'll show just a quick clip of what it looked like and talk a little bit about the aftermath. Cool. Oh, nope, trying to go to the next slide. Okay, cool. So it obviously worked really well. It was not something I planned more than a few days ahead of time. I didn't really have a moment to practice it because I was actually busy providing information to the senators to ask questions. I was kind of doing both the very serious side of the hearing and this very silly side. So honestly, it ended up blowing up far more than I could have ever expected. I thought maybe it would be like a funny BuzzFeed article or something, but I think it hit at just the right moment. So it ended up, a tweet from the Today Show ended up kind of all over. I couldn't even keep up with the number of mentions. And then it turned out folks were really interested in the creative activism side of it, and so I actually got invited to do an Ask Me Anything on Reddit. I'm not like on Reddit. I like know about it, and I've seen people do Ask Me Anythings, but I didn't really have any awareness while I was doing it of like how much participation it was getting or not. But I spent a few hours asking questions, and it turned out that 1.2 million people participated in this Ask Me Anything, and it actually still holds the record for one of the most, like the top 10 most popular Ask Me Anythings ever, which just, I still can't wrap my mind around that. But there was just this explosion of interest. And I think it, helped not only, my own sense of what I could do in the world, but also really helped just show the issue that I was working on in a way that we hadn't been able to get through before. So I talked a little bit about forced arbitration. You can tell it sounds like a very technical legal issue. I had this problem coming onto that campaign, a year and a half earlier, where even when I would say the word arbitration, people's eyes would glaze over. And so I spent a lot of that year and a half trying to figure out how to talk about it in ways that were more compelling. We started calling out a rip-off clause. We, came up with all these ways to just really focus on the real harm it does and this kind of corporate takeover of our court system. But it wasn't until Monopolyman and that kind of get-out-of-jail-free messaging that it really broke through in the public in a way that it had never done before. On a personal level, I'd explained to my parents many, many times over what forced arbitration was, and it wasn't until this happened that they actually remembered. It worked very well, and I want to just play this clip to show what I think was really interesting about this, which is that it somehow resonated on both sides of the aisle. As you can see here, this Fox Business. I got this interview request, and I was convinced that they were going to bring me on and somehow pull out some skeleton or attack some part of my identity and just have it be really combative. But that is not at all how it turned out, and part of it was just the strength of the message. I think even Fox News knew that they couldn't come after the Monopoly Man. So let's watch that, and I'll talk a little bit more about why I think that is.
Now, next guest during the Senate Banking Committee hearing on Equifax, Amanda Werner is our guest. Now, what do you want to see happen to Equifax? I know you've got a long list of things that you want to do in terms of financial reform, but what would you do with Equifax particularly?
Sure. So I think my number one priority and the reason that I dressed up as the Monopoly Man was to call attention to Equifax and Wells Fargo's use of forced arbitration as essentially get-out-of-jail-free card when they break the law. Unfortunately, the Senate is currently trying to pass legislation that would take away consumers' right to sue companies like Equifax and Wells Fargo, and we're trying to stop that.
You don't want arbitration as things stand now. You want the lawyers to come in so you can sue Equifax. Is that basically it?
Well, it's actually even simpler than that. It's not that we don't want arbitration, it's that we want consumers to be able to choose whether they pursue arbitration or they join together with other consumers in a class action lawsuit. And I think when you're talking about the Equifax data breach, which affected 3/4 of the adult population in the US, a class action lawsuit makes a lot more sense. You can't have 143 million separate arbitrations.
I think you made your point very well. And that was a brilliant staging. I'm not going to call it staging. It was just a very good costume in the right place at the right time, and you got on the show. Amanda, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, and please tell your senators to vote no on SJ Res 47.
Got it. You got it in. You got it in. You should have had a banner or something.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Very good.
I like how he thought my whole purpose for the stunt was to get on Fox News. But yeah, so I think one reason that this ended up happening instead of the many, many ways that it could have gone wrong, is also just the novelty of, having someone act really ridiculous in a costume, be very willing to embarrass themselves, and then actually go on TV and be like fairly well spoken. I think a lot of reporters, maybe started off ready to ask me like 1 or 2 questions for a puff piece, and then when I went into the policy and actually had compelling points, they ended up covering it a lot more. And ultimately, that's the part that, I gotta stop doing that, that's the part that benefited my campaign the most, because it would have been very, very easy for it to have just been that one, BuzzFeed article like, oh, a silly person does something funny in a hearing, ha ha ha. But I think what worked the best was that because I stuck to my points, because I was prepared, because we had a clear communications platform ready. I mean, I was literally in the room. Every time the camera was on me, I was making faces and doing silly things. Every time the camera was off me, I was on Twitter, like searching Monopolyman and tweeting at every single person, like, hi, this is who I am, this is why I'm here, this is the bill I'm opposing. And so, to me, the most remarkable thing about this stunt is not that it got attention, it's actually that every single article talked about forced arbitration, talked about why I was there, what I was doing, and talked about the specific bill number that we were opposing. And that was really effective and great. Okay, so I'm gonna stop just talking at you. Here's the part where I kind of want it to be more of a participatory discussion. So I want to break it down a little bit. Does anyone have thoughts on like why this stunt worked? I can definitely talk about why I think it did, but.
It's immediately recognizable, like you don't have to explain to anybody who the Monopolyman is.
Yes, that definitely helped a lot. You have to have that kind of clear character and that clear message, and tying that to the get out of jail free messaging, I think worked really, really well. And also just, I think a rich guy and a hearing with a rich guy is helpful. Any other thoughts?
I mean, it's so absurd. Like,
Yeah.
I think that's great. Like, the absurdity of being, like, dressed as Monopolyman and, like, what's generally a pretty dry Senate hearing room is just, it's there, it's big.
Yes, definitely absurdity helps. And that's, again, where I think the Trump era is so ripe for this, because everything is already absurd, and so you just kind of take it to the next level. I do think that one thing that really worked is it basically was like a real-life meme. That's kind of the model that I've been doing with a lot of my work, is just like, let's not even make people edit this to be funny, let's just have it be that already, and then we can just share it. I think a couple other reasons why it worked. I mean, obviously, a novel tactic, that's part of the absurdity. It's just, I haven't seen this before. And even since, actually, I haven't seen it that much, which is kind of surprising to me, but I think one real advantage that I have in this work is that I'm just really willing to make a fool out of myself. I've had a lot of my colleagues come up to me and say, oh my God, like I could never do that. And I'm just like, why not? This is so fun. This is way more fun than writing briefs. I think a couple other reasons it worked. Honestly, timing is key. When anything goes viral, it is so random. I've tried to replicate this a few times. I've gotten close a few times. I've failed many more times. But here, I think one reason the timing worked as well as it was, honestly, this was the same week as the Las Vegas shooting, which, by the way, again, just a year ago. And so it was this really depressing news week. There had been a couple days in a row of just really, really sad news. And so I think one reason that people grabbed onto Monopolyman as much as they did was because they just needed something to lighten it up. They needed something to be kind of happy about. So that honestly really worked in my favor. I think, also just again, being prepared. I think it could have easily been just a thing on the internet, but I was able to milk it for another few weeks and really kind of keep the pressure up on the campaign that I was leading because we had kind of a plan and because, I was able to do some good media work. I want to think a little bit about what could have gone wrong here. I think, one thing that could have gone wrong, obviously, is if I had not done these other things and it just became one article that didn't talk about what the work I was doing. But can any folks think of other things that really could have just messed this up?
I think that, first of all, if you hadn't gotten the seat that you had, which was like right in front of the cameras.
That was important.
Or if they had, kicked you out.
Yeah, so if I hadn't gotten the seat I had, or if I'd gotten kicked out. Yeah, so that took a lot of pre-planning. Thank God for interns. Someone got there at 7 a.m. in the morning and held that spot for me. So that's definitely really important. And also, just the fact that I had been in hearings before. I knew what seat to sit in to be in line of the camera. And that's been a problem at some other hearings where they've changed up the seating. What was the other part of it? If I got kicked out, yes. Okay, I have some thoughts on that. So the other part is I did have to do a bit of homework before I did this, because a lot of folks have asked me, how the hell did you not get kicked out? For folks that don't know, I was there for the entire 2.5-hour hearing. And if you watch the whole video, I'm making faces the entire time. Like, it ends up, a 1.5-minute clip, but that was a lot of work. And really, the reason is that I looked very carefully at what you could and couldn't do. I talked to a lot of folks that had done costumes or silly things in hearings before. And basically, you can wear a costume, you can make faces, you can't make noise, and you can't have a sign. And so I basically just tried to skirt that line as much as possible. I think I also did get a little bit lucky that the committee chair in the banking committee tends to be more willing to allow these kind of things to happen. I've definitely had Chuck Grassley on Judiciary not treat me as well. But it helps to know ahead of time what your rights are and kind of be ready, and also have a contingency plan. I mean, for me, I think the other thing that worked is that if they had dragged me out, that could have been even better, honestly. If you drag out the Monopoly Man, you're going to be the one that looks silly. All right, what about what role identity played? I think there are a lot of things to say about that. Any initial thoughts?
Well, you're dressing up as this old white man against all of these other old white men, which really points out the irony there in the juxtaposition.
Yeah, definitely. That was a big part of it. I think the fact that while at the same time I looked silly, I also on some weird level looked respectable. I mean, I think, the Monopoly Man is modeled after these bankers that were taught to respect from birth, basically. And I looked upper class even while I'm twirling my mustache and things like that. So that definitely helps. I would also add being white helps a lot. I think there are a lot of ways that if I had appeared to be from more marginalized groups, then I would not have been treated as well. Frankly, I think, appearing to be a man in this helped as well. I will say, too, though, on a personal level, the role of identity was interesting here because I'm actually transgender. I'm transmasculine and genderqueer. And I was not out at work at this time. I was just kind of, using old pronouns, not really worrying about it, was thinking maybe if I got a new job, I'd switch over. And then this happened, and everyone on the internet was arguing over my gender. They're like, wait, look at this funny guy. Oh, wait, no, this is a woman. Isn't that cool? And I was just like, oh, man, how do I handle this? And for the first time, I was talking to reporters, and they actually asked me, wait, what are your pronouns? And I had just never, I was using they, them among friends and stuff, but I hadn't actually done that at work because I just felt like it wasn't worth the energy. But if they were going to ask me, and if this was going to be, this big moment for me nationally, I was going to tell them. So I also used this opportunity to come out publicly, which was a lot and very weird. But I got to educate a lot of Fox News people about that. So fun stuff. But yeah, I think that was really important to the whole thing. And frankly, the last thing, I think that humor is protection. I think that they are a lot more willing to let you kind of do your thing if you're just being funny instead of being angry. I don't defend that at all. I think that's awful, but it's an important thing to keep in mind when you're planning these kinds of things. And I think partially it really is the calculation of if they had come down hard on me, if they had arrested me, if they had dragged me out, it would have made them look a lot sillier than it made me look. So last question, which we'll also get into with the next couple examples, is just what parts of this could be replicated and what parts are just like, you got lucky, retire now, can never be done again. Anyone have some thoughts on that?
Well, my basic thought is part of what works is that it's Monopoly Man and this money bags idea with, the content of the hearing, and I don't know that it would work as well if you were just dressed up as a funny character in a hearing that was not related to money at all.
Yeah, a couple things with that. One is, honestly, a Republican-held Congress does not bring a lot of CEOs in, it turns out. I've been looking for more opportunities, and it's so rare. It took a lot. It took a huge amount of malfeasance for them to drag these CEOs down there. They haven't done it much since. So I think that's definitely a big piece of it. What was the second part? I'm so bad at keeping track of these things.
That was the main idea.
That's the main idea. I had another thought. Oh, well, it's lost. But yeah, I think that's a big piece of it. It's been hard to find other opportunities, but keeping an eye out. I think the other piece, though, is that, it was the first time I did this. It's hard to do it again. There's so much that you're only going to get from that first time. But, there are other things you can do that kind of follow that model, and we'll get into a little bit of that. Any other thoughts on replicating it, or we should probably get to the next one? All right. So the next one I did. This one, it was another CEO. Mark Zuckerberg was coming to testify about a lot of things. But the part that I wanted to focus on was Facebook's, basically allowing Cambridge Analytica to steal all of our information and how that influenced the election. I forget the exact numbers now, but it was something like Facebook exposed like more than 100 million people, I think, to fake news ahead of the election. And then, Trump wins by 70,000 votes in the Electoral College. So I was there to kind of call attention to that. And the costume that I landed on, I definitely could have done Monopolyman. I feel like it wasn't as directly relevant. I wanted to do something new. And so I decided to be a Russian troll. And I'll show this little clip here to show you how that went.
Tell me exactly what it is you're doing today.
So today I'm attending Mark Zuckerberg's testimony in front of the Senate Judiciary and Commerce Committees. And I will be going, with my signatures and style.
So you're going to a committee hearing dressed as a Russian troll?
Yeah, I think it's appropriate. It's about Russian trolls.
Okay.
So what I tried to do is just kind of create a troll doll nude illusion. I actually originally considered buying a bodysuit. It's just like flesh colored, but I figured Senator Grassley would not be a fan of that. So I've got the shirt and the pants, and then I've got a little jewel for my belly button. I thought I was gonna have to make this. I thought I was gonna just buy a little wig and like put a bunch of hairspray and stuff, but turns out there are a lot of options for trolls on the go. Honestly, this is a really tiny wig. It's kind of like a child size, so it can't actually cover all my hair.
Well,
So we're just gonna try to make it work.
how do you get into a Senate hearing dressed like this?
I've always been able to get inside the room. It's more what happens when I'm on the inside. That's
All right.
a bigger deal. So we'll see. Honestly, the key to doing this part is just not being embarrassed. And luckily, that's a skill I have. I actually got this Russian soccer scarf. A little bit like a Russian babushka, just to get it across. Oh yeah, this is 100 rubles. If you recall from my Monopolyman stunt, I had a moment where I wiped my forehead with a $100 bill. So, the best comedians know to call back to their most popular material. Here we are.
The jewel actually really makes it, I have to say. I was skeptical of the jewel until I see the whole thing put together.
No, yeah.
Why are you doing this?
I think part of what I want to do is use how ridiculous I look to highlight how ridiculous the things that the senators and Mark Zuckerberg are going to be saying. Because I think one thing senators often do here is they try to use this as their kind of moment in the spotlight, their time to be hard on these terrible CEOs, and they don't actually back it up with any legislation.
So, what's it like in there?
It's tense. They have it all set up basically so that the audience, the people in the crowd are really far away, unfortunately. So I'm not able to do what I was able to do last time, kind of photobomb them the whole time.
But so wasn't the whole point of this that there would be a shot of Mark Zuckerberg and then there would be this troll behind Mark Zuckerberg? Did I watch this on TV?
That was definitely the ideal.
But if you didn't get the shot, doesn't that mean this whole thing was kind of a failure?
No, not at all. First of all, people are enjoying it. The media's paying attention. I think people are talking about it on social media. So as long as that's working out, I think it's good. Also, frankly, I think seeing the number of creative protesters in there really shows me that Monopolyman is working and starting to spread as a movement, and that's really my biggest goal.
Tell me that.
Okay, cool. All right, so before I launch into what I thought about how that went, I want to see, do you guys think it worked? You can tell me to my face, it's fine.
So the hearing itself didn't actually have a discernible purpose.
Yeah,
So working is tough there.
yeah. The hearing, I don't know if anyone paid that much attention to it, but it was useless. It was very weird.
were you not to some degree upstaged by some of the rather idiotic questions that you asked? Like, how do you make money?
Yeah.
And you know, basically, how does the internet work?
Yeah, I definitely think that played a big role.
Also, you weren't positioned to be in the shop.
Yeah.
Every time everybody sees Mark Zuckerberg, they don't see you.
Yeah, I will definitely talk about that because I think that was the biggest weakness here. Any other thoughts?
There was one thing that also stayed interesting about Mark Zuckerberg was actually sitting on the booster seats, and that was another really big
Yeah, there was a lot to make fun of Mark Zuckerberg for at this hearing, and so I wasn't the first thing that people went to, which is unfortunate. But yeah, good point. Did you have something?
I mean, you did have that hair though, so like
I did.
a lot on social media that day about it.
Yeah, okay, so let's talk about it. First of all, I just want to say I was robbed. I got someone there. I was like scrounging for people to volunteer to line stand for me the day before because, of course, if I showed up like that standing in line, I would be kicked out. So I actually got someone there. This hearing started at 2 p.m. I got people to stand there for me from 7 a.m. to like 1:30. And they got the second spot in line, which at any hearing, that should give me like my pick of the room, right? But the way that they had this set up, really to protect Mark Zuckerberg, was they had him on one side of the room. They had about 12 tables just filled with reporters. And then they had the crowd. And they also wouldn't let you actually pick your seat in the crowd. They pretty much told you where you had to sit. And so even though I had the second spot, they had me somewhere in the middle. So absolutely robbed. I, to this day, think that had I been sitting right behind Zuckerberg, would have been bigger than Monopolyman. But what are you going to do? But like I said in the video, I think in many ways it still did work. Unfortunately, once I got into the room, I really was crestfallen. I was just like, oh man, this isn't going to work. I'm so sad. I put so much energy into this. And so I wasn't even paying attention to what was going on. But there were a bunch of people taking photos of me. It was popping up all over social media, and I just like missed it. And so most of the photos, I'm just like looking down, and you can kind of see my wig, and you don't know what's going on. So I think that was a weakness. I think also, I think the idea of being a like 90s troll doll with the Russian flag in my head probably looked a little better than it ended up looking, to be honest. I think Monopolyman is much more instantly recognizable. It's also just less complicated. Like the troll doll is one thing, but the Russian troll, and then you got to think about how that relates to Facebook. It's a little more complicated, so I think that was another weakness. I would also say reporters this time around were not as interested, and I think a big part of it, which I just didn't anticipate, is that there were a lot of very strange protesters there. And some of them were there for a cause, and many of them were just kind of like conspiracy theorists that had signs that didn't make any sense. And like, I think basically I was read as one of those folks, and they just did not take me seriously. And so again, identity, I think, came into play because I wasn't dressed as this respectable, rich white man. And so they were just like, oh, here's this crazy person over here, let's not talk to them. So I didn't get the same kind of press attention in interviews that I got in the first time around. Yeah.
Speaking to the idea of reporters being less interested, do you think the fact that you were so successful the first time, now it became like, oh, Amanda Werner, they're just doing it again?
I would have said that, except I don't think anyone knew that I was Monopolyman. I think that would have gotten me more attention, but yeah, I mean, honestly, no one, like I never get recognized out of costume. It's like not a thing. I've actually even, last Halloween, which was like 3 weeks after the original Monopolyman stunt, I went as Monopolyman because I'm like, hey, like this is my moment. And I went to Halloween parties in DC, and everybody was like, oh, haha, you're dressed like that person. And I'm like, no, I am that person. So it's actually been like kind of maddening. It's just, it's great that y'all came to this talk, but if you saw me walking down the street, you would not have known who I was. By the way, what do we want to do about this pizza?
I think eat it.
Okay, yeah, just want to say, like, go get your pizza if you're hungry. Don't worry about offending me or something. But yeah, I think that pretty much covers those questions. Anyone else have thoughts on why it didn't work, why it did work?
Do you think knowledge of the subject affected how successful the activism was? Because with arbitration, people are like, I have no idea what that is. Whereas with like
Yeah, I think that makes sense as part of it. The other piece is, because I didn't get to the point of actually doing interviews on this, I couldn't also explain why I was there. And I also couldn't have that surprise factor, because I think that could have worked well here if everyone thought I was just, some random person off the street, and then I start talking about what I was talking about earlier. I think it could have had a nice surprise factor. I think it would have been a fun visual, someone in a troll wig, actually giving a coherent interview. But we didn't get to that point, so it didn't work out quite as well. Okay, let's get to the next one, which doesn't involve a costume, which is good. I don't want to be pigeonholed as the costume person. So this is kind of another route that creative activism can take. I kind of referenced this earlier, but I helped lead the protest against Kirsten Nielsen at the Mexican restaurant. So just to set the stage for this was in June. This was maybe a week or two after the family separation policy was first announced. Just as a little fun backstory, the way that this came together is I had a friend who was at the restaurant, sent me a text, and basically was like, you need to get people down here. Kirsten Nielsen is sitting at this table. I can't believe she's here. And so I just put out a call on social media. I got there about 10 minutes later and was standing outside the restaurant by myself and was just oh God, what do I do? Do I just go and yell at her by myself? I don't know what my plan is. But luckily a bunch of folks from the Metro DC Democratic Socialists came. And so we ended up with probably 15 to 20 people in the restaurant. We decided that we were going to go in there and kind of shame her. And also we had a speaker. And so we played the sound of the children crying in the detention centers. I think it was 2 days after that audio had come out. So I'll show just a little video of that, and then we can analyze it. All right, so did that one work?
I thought it worked. I remember I was home for the summer, and I saw that video popped up on Twitter, and I watched it with the whole family. I was working. I'm from Texas, and I was working for an organization that provided services for people seeking asylum and stuff. So
Awesome.
It was another way for me to talk about what I did, how it helped bring attention to the issue.
Cool, I'm glad to hear that.
I think it worked in an interesting way in that it became a different story in and of itself. It caused a lot of controversy about whether or not it was justified. It caused an additional conversation about civility, and continues as things like this happen to bring up questions of civility. So in a certain way, the additional conversations that resulted from this extended your message further, because people kept saying, well, is civility breaking down in America? Remember when Kirsten Nielsen got you? And then so your story got repeated. So in a sense, it did work in that way.
Yeah, I will take this opportunity to formally apologize to everyone for all of the think pieces that came out about civility, because it's been the bane of my existence. But yeah, I think you're totally right. It launched a conversation, and in some ways that's been helpful, in some ways that's been really annoying. But I do feel good about the fact that it's launched a lot of similar tactics. This really was the first time, at least in many years, that this kind of thing had gotten some attention. I would like to note this is absolutely not the first time that someone has done this. I mean, obviously, a lot of groups that really get denied attention in the media, Black Lives Matter, for example, do a lot of things like this. And I think, we'll get more into what role identity played, but I think that had a lot to do with it as well. Any other initial thoughts on why it worked?
You were very clear with your message. Like there wasn't just a bunch of people yelling at once. Like yes, there was some overlapping, but you could hear what everybody was clearly saying, and everybody was very good at articulating their thoughts and beliefs.
Yeah. One thing that is unfortunate is that the video obviously is not clear at all. I think if we'd had a really crisp video with a better camera, that would have been ideal, obviously, but planned in 20 minutes, what are you gonna do?
I'm just gonna say that, if this hadn't happened, I would never have known that this woman was going out to eat at a Mexican restaurant.
That helped.
That knowledge alone is pretty galling and pretty I don't know, painful even, right?
Yeah.
So it kind of re-energizes you and angers you more about, I mean, but you're already not super angry about the issue, and you're
Yeah.
wow, you're really, really shameless.
Yeah, I think that part is really important. I mean, the fact that she even went out to a Mexican restaurant would have been a story in itself if people had found out about it. So that combined with, the novel tactic of people yelling at her in public and shaming her really combined to make it effective. I would also say, I think one reason it really worked and one reason that more recent kind of similar things haven't worked quite as well is that it was just the exact right timing. It was in this really raw anger. I think people were equally angry around Kavanaugh, but before this, it was the first time people had really had that raw anger as a whole society, I think, in a while. And obviously, I think this was more cross-cutting as far as, party lines than Kavanaugh was. So I think that timing worked really well. The fact that it came out shortly after the ProPublica audio was published worked really well. It was just that fever pitch moment. And so even similar things, Ted Cruz got shouted out of a restaurant, and that got a lot of attention but didn't get the same kind of widespread support, and I think that's part of why. I would also say, I think one reason this resonated, it combines with that raw anger, but it inspired people to do more. Especially, I know those of us in DC, running into politicians occasionally is just a fact of life, and so I think it helped to give us, and even gives people, back at home in their districts, just the permission to take that extra step. Because again, at this moment of raw anger, I think the other part of it is that people felt really powerless. We didn't know what to do. We were holding protests and things like that, but we didn't feel like there was anything that could actually effectuate change. And I can't draw direct lines, but I will say the very next day, they at least publicly stepped back the policy. I don't know if that actually happened in the end, but they announced that they were stepping it back. And I would speculate that this could have at least played a role in making it that, them feel like that's something they had to do. So I think that just helped. Again, it's using creative theatrics to inspire people and drive action. So what were the risks? I mean, there's obviously something that's a lot more risky than wearing a costume. Anyone have thoughts on risk? Yeah, well, maybe I should talk a little bit about what actually did happen. So basically, within the first couple minutes, all of us talked to each other, and we were like, okay, what are we willing to do here? Are we trying to get arrested? Are we going to leave when they ask us to? And luckily, all the folks were down. We all decided we will get arrested for this. And so the restaurant manager did pretty immediately tell us to leave. We said no. We were honestly just waiting for Secret Service to come in. There were two people that were standing right next to her, as you can see in the video, but they just kind of blocked her and they didn't take any action against us. And so we were fully ready to sit there and wait forever, but we actually protested her for about 20 minutes and no one did anything. And so we were like, okay, I guess we should leave. And then just as we were walking down the block, tons of Secret Service suddenly came out of nowhere and actually hassled us for quite a while. But we were ready to take the risk of being arrested or potentially worse.
I think this also intersects with identity as well, because from the video, you all look quite presentable.
Yep.
Had there been any people of color, not just
Yep.
So that's kind of like where do you use your privilege?
Yeah, I think that's really, really important to this action and similar actions. Like I said, we are not the first people to do this kind of thing, and it has not gone this well for most people that have done these kind of tactics. I mean, even, ACT UP in the 1980s, which I, try to use as a model for a lot of my work, they got treated a lot worse than we did, and then there are certainly a lot of groups today that are getting treated a lot worse when they do things like this. And I will say, without going into too many details, we did get pretty harassed by Secret Service. One of our folks actually got hurt by them. And so I would just say, this is a group of like 20 almost entirely white people, and we still barely kind of got out of it unscathed, or somewhat unscathed. So that's a really important thing to consider when you're doing tactics like this. I think, beyond safety, another thing that could backfire, obviously, is the civility debate. Is this too much? Are we going too far? Does it then hurt, I mean, it feels ridiculous to say this, but does it hurt the message of don't put children in cages if you're gonna yell at people in restaurants? I personally don't think it does. I think that when your opponent is doing something inhuman, you can certainly match that by being uncivil. I think, in fact, we are kind of morally obligated to take big risks and to do. I mean, honestly, this to me is pretty tame. Like getting yelled at in public, whatever. I've gotten yelled at plenty of times in my life, and if I were in power like this, I would expect it. I mean, I think all of our politicians face things like this from time to time. Sometimes it's warranted, sometimes it's unwarranted, but it is part of the job. But obviously there's been a pretty robust debate on that, and a lot of people disagree. So I think you also have to be very calculated in doing something like this and making sure that it's something that you feel merits taking this kind of risk.
Was there a risk with throwing it together so fast? Right, and you have the 20 minutes or whatever to
Yep.
kind of come up with your whole strategy and what you're going to say and how you're going to present, all of it. I mean, there's a significant risk there that could have gone way off. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will say every time I've done any of these tactics we're talking about today, there's always a moment where my heart is just pounding and I am freaked out. And the reason for that is because, when you do anything on the national stage, it can go wrong very quickly. It can embarrass you for the rest of your life. Anytime you're trying to get attention, it could go really badly. And then, add that on to something like this where we're trying to do it for a really important cause. And so if we do it the wrong way, we could end up actually making things worse, which we never want to do. So that was definitely what was going through my mind when I was standing outside the restaurant by myself. I was like, I have no idea what I'm going to say to her. What if I say something really dumb and then it goes viral for really bad reasons? And there's just a lot of things that could have happened. So I'm glad that the folks that were with me had good ideas and we were all down, and no one. Other thing that could have gone wrong is if just one person in the group, decided to throw something, decided to say something that was crossing a line. There are many things, and if one person in our group had done it, we would have all gotten blamed for it. So that's another risk just even in doing group action, especially for me, I didn't know anybody in the group. And, the other safety risk too is if someone had thrown something or done something violent, I would have also gotten arrested for that, even if I hadn't done it myself. So let's talk a little bit more about identity. I do think that it played a big role here. I think also, the fact that we were in DC played a big role here. I think that, at least when it comes to middle-class white people, I think the police allow us to do a little bit more in DC than they do in other cities. And I think we were given leeway for that reason. I was actually kind of surprised by how much blowback we ended up getting in the end, but because I haven't really gotten messed with by the police in my protests before. But that was a big piece of it. I think also, us being passionate young people played well on social media. Any other parts of identity that come to mind for folks?
Yeah, I wonder what you think. I mean, obviously this came together quickly, and the people who happened to answer the call were Metro DSA on Facebook. So I wonder what you think the implications of the fact that it was, people there were DSA had on this.
Oh yeah, I think it had a big effect, partially because I think most of the people who are here have, protested many times. They've done media interviews many times. And that's the other piece. It's partially what happens in the moment, but it's also what happens in the aftermath. If someone had gone on TV and said something, that was not in line with our message, or, even if they're just not very good on camera and they're kind of awkward, that can then become the story. And so I was very lucky that these were folks that do, regular kind of protests. They have a clear message. They're media savvy. That helps a lot. So thanks to the DSA for that. Any other thoughts on identity before we get to the last example? All right. So the last one, this was the most recent thing I've done. And this was me kind of trying to, I considered it an experiment, seeing if I could kind of harness the power of and visibility of Monopolyman with the attention that I'd gotten from the Kirsten Nielsen stuff to kind of draw attention. So what I did here is I started with something silly and then tried to pivot it into something serious. So this was the nomination hearing for Trump's nominee to head the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I often work on consumer protection issues, so this was like within my portfolio. I showed up as Monopolyman. No one was really surprised. I do hearings on these subjects occasionally. And so for the first half of the hearing, I was just Monopolyman. I was doing my thing, kind of trying to show that she was corrupt and wouldn't be protecting consumers. And then the other piece of her background is that she was the head of the Office of Management and Budget while the family separation policy was going through. And so there had been some controversy over her role in that and if she had approved that. And so Elizabeth Warren here is asking her questions about it, and that's when I decided to pivot what I was doing and try to use the visibility of Monopolyman to call attention to this issue. So I'll just to let you know, Elizabeth Warren's gonna ask a question first just to kind of give you guys a little bit of background and set it up, and then the real part of my stunt will start.
Are you involved in any way in developing or implementing the policies that led this administration to take thousands of children away from their parents at the border?
Senator, I had no role in setting the policy that we discussed. I was
answer
aware.
my question. It was developing or implementing.
I had no role in developing it in terms of its announcement by the Attorney General. And
So
I
you
was
didn't
not
help
aware
the
of
Attorney
that.
General announce it.
So notice my hat there.
Did you help develop or implement this policy?
Subsequent to the Attorney General's announcement, there were meetings within the administration on the general topic of the implementation. And again, the Office of Management and Budget does
So
actually
is that a
participate in
yes?
those meetings.
You were involved? That's a yes? These are innocent children who may be scarred forever by this policy. It is fundamentally immoral, and you were part of it, Ms. Kraninger. It is a moral stain that will follow you for the rest of your life. And if the Senate votes to give a big promotion to you after this, then it is a stain on the senators who do so.
Senator Cortes Maskell. Oh, excuse me. I apologize. I didn't see Senator Moran come in. Senator Moran. Oh, excuse me. Rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, what I would like to do is, once we've got the noise cleared up here, we'll turn around and we'll go back and ask some questions with both of our two witnesses. Thank you. Let me just begin, Ms. Reed.
Okay, so basically what I did here is when Elizabeth Warren started asking about these questions, I eventually took the Monopolyman mustache off. I didn't want this to seem light. I put an Abolish ICE sign on my hat. And then when she finished her question, I played the ProPublica audio of the children crying. So my question, did it work? Mm-hmm. Other thoughts?
Was it clear
where that sound was coming from? I mean, we all know.
Yeah.
But did everyone else in that hearing room know?
No.
The people who were watching it on television know?
No. That's an important part of this. I will say in this video, I had to up the volume a little bit. You could tell that people in the room heard it. I don't know. I think the people that were immediately in front of me, I think Kraninger herself heard it. One tricky thing is this was a couple weeks after the Nielsen thing, and so I don't know if it was as immediately recognizable as it was a few weeks ago. You know, you could kind of hear what's going on, but if you don't remember exactly what it sounded like, you might not know.
So in other words, it's subtle.
Yeah, it's subtle. Unfortunately, the speaker wasn't as loud as I wanted.
So it can be good
Yeah.
if it goes around and people talk about it and say, what was that? Oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
But is that what happened here?
Yeah, I mean, you could even tell. I think the senator, you know, he knew something was happening. He knew a disruption was happening. I don't think he knew what I was doing. He was just like, what is this? Why is there noise? We'll wait. And then, you know, the number one thing that makes me realize that it definitely wasn't read in the room as what it was supposed to be was that I didn't get kicked out, which, like, I was prepared to be arrested, did not get arrested. You'll also notice I had a sign in my hat. That was one of the two things I said that I'm not allowed to do. I was hoping at this point to get arrested because I thought it was worthy of, again, you see how hard it is for a white person to get arrested, but...
I assume you put that sign on your hat at that point thinking you were going to get thrown out anyway, and so you might as well go ahead and make clear what your message was.
Exactly.
But you were assuming you were going to be thrown out of the sound.
Yeah, absolutely. And instead what happened is I played the whole clip, which I think was about a minute and a half long. I decided not to just keep playing it because that seemed kind of pointless, and so I turned it off, and then I kind of looked around expecting that the guard would come to me, and nothing happened, and so I kept sitting there. It was really strange. But, you know, again, I think that if it had been really effective, I absolutely would have been thrown out and arrested. So that's a big part of it. You know, I think all of those reasons played a role. I think another reason it didn't work as well is because you couldn't tell immediately in the room necessarily what was happening. I think reporters honestly didn't notice it. This did end up getting attention on social media when I posted it later that night, but like no reporters talked about it at all, which again, surprised me. I thought I was gonna get thrown out. I thought all this stuff was gonna happen, but in the room it seemed like it just didn't break through, and that was really important. I think it could have worked, but just didn't work quite as well as it could have. And then the other piece of it, you know, is that frankly, like, people weren't watching this hearing. They should be, because the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is really important, and she's a really terrible nominee. But there was a lot happening at this point. I'm trying to remember. There were a million stories in the news. It was not, I think it might have even been around the time of the first Kavanaugh hearing. Like, people were not watching this. So that definitely hurt it as well. And then I think just, as sad as it is, the family separation policy not being at the top of people's minds as it was a few weeks earlier, I think hurt it as well. The risks we kind of talked about, I could have been arrested, should have been arrested, wanted to be arrested. But I think there are some other risks here too. I mean, one, I was very worried that I might detract from the senator's questions. Like you said, it was a powerful moment. I didn't want to ruin it. I obviously did strategically wait until she was done. I would never interrupt Senator Warren. But, you know, there's still, if I had gotten kicked out, if like that had become the story, depending on how that was messaged in the media, that could have hurt the cause instead of helped the cause. Especially when you're talking about embarrassing someone in public, and, you know, someone who people might sympathize with. Like, people have sympathized with Secretary Nielsen. People definitely could have sympathized with her as well, and then it could have been like, oh, this unfair protester attacks this poor woman. So you always kind of have to think about that. The other risk that I identified, but, you know, obviously decided it was worth it, was that it could just confuse Monopolyman's messaging. Like, that's a clear character that has some power, and I didn't want to, you know, mess it up by just making it a confusing message. Or, you know, the other piece is like, they kind of let me in these hearings now, but this could totally ruin that relationship. Again, luckily, they somehow just didn't realize what was going on, and so it had zero effect whatsoever. But this would definitely make it hard for me to do another hearing again. But in that moment, I decided that it was worth it simply because it was such a powerful and potent issue. So how could it work better? And we can kind of open that up to like any of this. How could any of these stunts or this type of creative activism in general work better?
What if Elizabeth Warren had played the tape?
That would have been great. Yeah, it's actually been, something I wanted to do, but it's been hard, is I would like to coordinate more with these folks. I think it's been very clearly like, we're glad you're here, but we cannot have a hand in this. And I totally understand, they have to maintain their decorum as senators and things like that, but it definitely would be nice to have some more official support in some of this. I mean, even, with the Secretary Nielsen protest, aside from Maxine Waters, most of the Democrats kind of threw us under the bus. It would be really nice to have folks in power legitimizing these kind of tactics, especially when it's about something so serious.
Have you thought about doing things that purposely will get you arrested? Like, I mean, there are a lot of these protesters who come in with the goal of being taken out because they're making a mess of this. And you said that you had hoped to get arrested for doing this, but you definitely could have been a bit louder. Like, stood up and started talking. Like, do you see that as a progression now?
So I have a lot of thoughts on this because I do feel like there's a bit of a movement right now to just kind of try to get arrested to get arrested. I just try to be very strategic in everything that I do. I think that, for instance, like the image of Monopolyman being dragged out of a hearing, I think would really help get more of a story if I'm trying to do this. So there are moments when I've thought that tactic made sense. I think when it's just like to say X number of people were arrested, in my opinion, I don't think that's as influential. I think if you're getting arrested for a clear purpose, it shouldn't be the end of what you're looking for, but if it's, part of what happens because you're doing something for the greater good, I think that makes a lot of sense. So like I said, was willing to get arrested for Secretary Nielsen, was willing to get arrested for this. I can definitely imagine future things where that would make sense, but I wouldn't do it just to do it. And honestly too, like there are just moments, like it's not easy or fun to get arrested. Sometimes they just kind of let you go, especially in the Capitol, but other times it can be a lot more difficult. Actually, there was one Monopolyman protest I did where, like I said, Senator Grassley was giving me a hard time even though I wasn't breaking any rules. And I was supposed to catch a flight later that night. And so I was like, I can't risk that they might actually bring me down to the jail because I'm going to miss my flight and this is going to be bad. So I think just, figuring out if it works for you. I think, again, especially if you're a kind of person who could be safe interacting with the police, I think it's good for us to take that risk when we're fighting for a just cause. But then on the other side of that, I think if, we're just kind of doing it to create a spectacle, it's not always helpful and can in fact, kind of hurt the seriousness of the message.
So going back to did it work, sort of in the bigger picture, right?
Mm-hmm.
I guess to answer that question, you have to say, like, what is it that you wanted to achieve?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I don't know, honestly, what happened with the bill that you were opposing as Monopolyman. And did it go through? Did it change? Like, did you have an impact on that?
Yeah, so that's a heartbreaking story. It was, so Monopolyman happened the first week of October. Then exactly 3 weeks later was the vote on the bill. And to give a little bit more explanation, what had happened is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau had issued a rule that would have restricted the use of forced arbitration. It was great. I spent, a year and a half making that rule stronger and getting public support for it and all that. And then Trump got elected, and suddenly Congress was coming after the rule and trying to repeal it. I don't know if you guys followed the Congressional Review Act, where they just repealed a bunch of laws right when they came in. It's basically all Congress got done for the first year, aside from the tax bill. And so suddenly it was under threat, and I had to mount this big campaign to save it. And so we were basically looking at, maybe slightly less than 50-50 odds before Monopolyman. Monopolyman happened, and it put us in the spotlight in a way that we had never been able to do. Like I said, not just the attention, but actually explaining it to people and getting them to understand. Because forced arbitration is one of those issues where, you might not know about it, you might not think it sounds that interesting, but when you hear that it's like them taking away your, like constitutionally guaranteed right to court, people get pretty angry. And so it's not hard to convince people on either side about it. So this helped so much with visibility, helped really convince people. I personally, when it happened, I was like, oh man, like this just saved the campaign. Like there's no way they're even gonna take a vote now because it's gonna be so unpopular. Never underestimate Mitch McConnell. So we, as a campaign, were focused on doing the media, figured like if we keep this in the spotlight, they're not gonna bring the vote. 3 weeks later, they brought the vote and it was a surprise. Like I think we learned 2 or 3 days before that they were gonna bring it up for a vote. We just thought it wasn't gonna happen. I think deadline was just a couple weeks away. They brought it for a vote and it was extremely close. I mean, I can tell you as someone who was really inside of it, at 2 p.m. that day, we had more votes than we needed to protect it. However, don't underestimate Mitch McConnell. I believe there were some deals made in the back room, and basically what ended up happening, 50-50 vote, tie broken by Mike Pence. So it was repealed. And it was, on a personal level, quite shocking to just go from like career high to career low so short. But even so, I wouldn't say that it didn't work because ever since then, forced arbitration is just talked about in a completely different way. I mean, I had someone a few months ago get coffee with me and they were asking like, oh, I'm working on this campaign around securities. Is there a way we can talk about forced arbitration? Because that's like the sexy issue. And I was like, what are you talking about? When did this become the sexy issue? So I do think that that really had an impact. I will also say, I think where we did fail is that we just didn't have quite enough time from when we found out that it was actually going to be brought to a vote to when it was, because the level of outrage the day after the vote was off the charts. There were more people talking about forced arbitration on Twitter the day after Republicans repealed this rule than there were the day I did Monopolyman. And so there was a failure in messaging of just making people realize this was happening. Even though I'd been kind of warning about it, people didn't know it was happening that day, and so they hadn't yet called their senator. So I think that's another thing that can make a difference. But part of this is like, I think in the Trump era in general, there's not that much we can do with Congress the way it currently is to actually stop things. I think one of the most effective things we can do is message to the public and at least get them behind us so that hopefully when Democrats take back power, this can be one of the top priorities, undoing the damage. And actually with that, I want to just talk for a minute about what's next. Where do we go from here? Where can we go from here? And how will the election impact those choices? I think, as I said, creative activism, I think, works anywhere, but I think it especially works right now when it's kind of our only choice. This is a news cycle that's pretty impossible to break into unless you do something outrageous. So I think, hopefully, as we get a little bit more power back, we'll see what happens on Tuesday, it won't be quite as necessary to do these kind of things all the time. I hope that, we'll be able to command the narrative a little bit more without having to kind of beg for it. But I think, if things don't go incredibly well on Tuesday, this does provide a good roadmap for things we can do to force them to pay attention to us and to force ourselves into the public debate. So I hope that, some of these tactics can inspire other folks to do this. And certainly if anyone wants to talk more about ideas or ever collaborate on anything, I'm very open. But with that, I think I'll open it up to ask me anything.